found out that you were donor conceived?
Yeah, well, in my case, it was a matter of insatiable curiosity. I was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan in 1958. At the some of the earlier days, and my parents both died by 2000 and took their secret to their grave. So I had a cousin on my mom's side who had done testing on 23andMe in 2011, which was really, pretty early for that too. And it looked interesting and I wanted to try it. And, and what popped up were, a bunch of cousins, third, fourth cousins with names I had never heard of. From Eastern Europe, and a lot of them said that they were Ashkenazi Jewish, and I was, very puzzled. And we tried chasing up genealogical dead ends, and came up with all kinds of crazy theories. This was before 23andMe or Ancestry or any of them were able to give really strong or precise ethnicity estimates.
Okay.
So there was very little to go on. It was just these vague hints.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was then trying to get both my older sisters and cousins on my dad's side to test so that we could, chase this up. And that's how, pretty soon it came clear, oh my gosh, my sisters are only half sisters. And I'm not related to any of my cousins on my dad's side, only on my mom's side,
Yeah.
And my oldest sister, who's 14 years older than I am, I said, what do you know? And she said, well, I know they really wanted you. So they were going for some kind of fertility treatment at the University of Michigan. And I said, 1957, that could only have been a sperm donor. So that's how we figured out. So actually my oldest sister was actually conceived with, our dad, but then he went into World War II in the South Pacific, New Guinea, and a lot of horrible diseases out there. And the cures might have been even worse than the diseases. And he came back. And what we figured out is that, he was, everyone else was booming babies and nothing was happening. So we pieced it together. So my middle sister, who was born in 1951, also donor conceived, but from a different donor.
Okay.
But and of course, I was immediately trying to write letters to every doctor from the University of Michigan that I could, lay eyes on. And by then we figured out, the donor must be Ashkenazi, Jewish. But I was just getting nowhere. No responses for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
more or less gave up. And then all of a sudden, a brand new half sister popped up on Ancestry.
Mm-hmm.
And this was in 2017.
Okay.
So that's right when a bunch of stories sort of hit the press about genetic genealogy research techniques.
Yep.
And so we got on Facebook and found one of these groups, found a search angel. She helped us nail down another donor conceived half sister.
Okay.
And then did this job of finding common matches and triangulating and doing genetic genealogy, and came up with a extremely likely person who had died the year before. And so but he had two kids of his own, a daughter and son, and we were able to get in touch with the son. Okay. And he verified that, dad said he had done that. And
Oh.
so I've got, new family to one degree or another. It's closer to some than to others, but it's been a really amazing journey.
Yeah. So what do you think are some of the things, I heard you mention the search angel. like, what are some of the things that helped you along in this?
She was really good. She was with DNA detectives,
Hmm.
and they have a particular group for the donor conceived. So they have really started, specializing. And so we were lucky. She found a match for the three of us half sisters, who himself was only part Jewish. So that narrowed down the search. So instead of having to go through like 4 family trees off of that match, she
Hmm.
could narrow it down to 1. That speeded things up quite a bit. And that was a successful strategy. And it happened mostly one Friday night. It was just the 4 of us just, going through every possibility. And she found it. She said, I think this is the guy. And it seems right. But I will say that for whatever reason, his um, uh, daughter and son did not want to actually test to verify. They did not want to do that. But we had verified the match through our biological father's maternal line, and later on, eventually sharing a lot of his family genealogy. They were willing to share genealogy. We were able to nail down through 23andMe
Hmm.
a match also on the paternal side. So I said, okay, that's
Yeah,
it must be.
things are connecting a little bit more. So yeah, wow. So are you in contact with any of your siblings through your donor?
Um, so we are in touch with his son.
Okay.
Now his daughter basically just really didn't want anything to do with us directly. Um, she is a medical doctor though, and she's kind enough to compile family medical history, pass it to her brother, and he shared it with us, which was a godsend.
Yes.
So this is a case where I was able to correct, some misperceptions about risk. So for example, I had thought I should be worried primarily about cardiovascular disease. And I wasn't particularly worried about cancer. Oh, we don't have cancer in our family. Well, guess what?
Mhm.
So, for example, I'm now on the early and accelerated colonoscopy schedule. And, thank goodness, because, there have been they're on top of things in a way that might not have happened if I had just sort of taken the attitude, that, oh, well, we don't have cancer in our family.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a really incredible thing that we're able to get like that medical history. It's really important for us too, I
Yes.
feel like.
Yes.
Um, so what was your first reaction to kind of putting those pieces together as like, oh, like I'm donor conceived, like this kind of makes sense now.
Yeah. Um, of course, that's a shock. There's no question about it. But it was also the kind of revelation that things sort of fall into place, and you begin to understand things in a new way, validate certain things. So I didn't look like anybody in my family. And in fact, with my sisters, people were always joking that we don't look like sisters, and there were jokes in the family about, oh well, ha ha, postman, milkman, ha ha ha, and my parents would just laugh it off, and so we just laughed it off too,
Hmm.
you know um, and so being able to find new relatives who, and again, it took a while. There was a gap in from 2011 to 2017
Yeah.
between the revelation about being donor conceived until we identified the donor and his family. But one of my donor conceived half sisters and I really do look a lot alike, and we have very similar academic interests, career trajectory, and then we discovered, like, it's like we married the same guy. They were both our husbands were electrical engineers who both got bored with it and both wanted more of a people-oriented career. And so they sort of, shifted in that direction. And then we have our own kids, and there's that whole family life balance thing, and, the debates about how to handle that. And you could almost imagine the guys saying at the same time, "That's okay, dear. You pursue your career and I'll take care of the kids."
Oh,
Wow. So within my own family, and I think this is true for a lot of us, there's this sort of, I call it black sheepism. Not just how we look, but how we behave
yeah.
seems anomalous within the family. And I think I was very lucky because, my parents were very loving and supportive, and, no traumas or dramas or anything. So the fact that I was a little different in some ways, they definitely noticed it. So my parents were both very uh, warm, touchy-feely, don't ever hurt anybody's feelings ever. Don't be, oh,
And if
you're blurred, Jared.
not anymore.
Yeah.
Hi, and if you want to know what a husband looks like, here
Nice to meet you.
But so they were, really prioritized harmony, not hurting anybody's feelings. And I'm just, really intense, argumentative, sarcastic, and a lot of nervous energy. And so they were always trying to sort of, tamp that down. And, meeting new family members and, stereotypes about Jewish, nervous energies. Yeah, okay. So that was definitely a feeling sort of validation in that regard.
I really think that's all I have. I mean, is there anything that else you want to share, or?
Yeah, actually, I think, I know that, the pendulum is, swung back and forth about, genetic nature versus nurture, right? On intellectual ability, personality, behavioral traits, and so on. And, I sort of feel like a little experiment of one, and being able to make these kinds of comparisons now has been just endlessly fascinating.
Right.
And, so one old family friend, pointed out, a colleague of mine, as well as a friend who's Jewish himself. And he said, most of the scientific evidence now is sort of pointing to, really is pretty close to 50-50 on a lot of this, nature versus nurture. So he said, so your biological father, you could think of as roughly a quarter of you. And that seems about right in many ways. There were a lot of things, little things. I love jazz. I love science fiction, Star Trek in particular. At that, that family, the biological father's family was that. And
very cool.
But it's still actually, I think, more complicated than just this, nature nurture.
Yeah.
People always ask me, when I moved from the Midwest, this sort of rather bland, conservative Western Michigan, and moved to the East Coast. First of all, I was always sort of rebelling against that culture. And when I got to college on the East Coast, lots of people just sort of asked me in passing, "Are you Jewish? Are you Jewish?" And I'd say, not that I know of. Even my husband, who is, his father was Jewish, and he would be asking me this. But getting back to this, nature versus nurture, when people look at you and they see something, and then they react to you a certain way. They may not say anything to you, but they still have it in their head.
Yeah.
And then they behave to you in a certain way. And then you respond back to that, whether you know it or not.
Right.
You know, how many, you start to think, how many times were people sort of treating me a certain way because they thought I was Jewish,
Mm.
whether it is Jewish people or Gentile people,
Uh-huh.
positive or negative, but they're behaving in a certain way based on a set of assumptions, and then they're behaving and you react. And
Yeah.
so this is, you know, this is a complication, I think, to the whole nature nurture thing. And I have been, you know, trying to um, uh, grapple with it to understand it. And it's been, you know, fascinating, actually.